Okay, now we're dealing with the book of Genesis. So Genesis means beginnings. The first word in the book of Genesis is Bereshit, and it means in the beginning, or in the head of things, literally. So you see in the first verse of Genesis, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And so Genesis is all about the beginnings. And we've talked about the Pentateuch and its order of writing and all. The people of Israel would have needed to know perhaps some of these stories, these accounts of how God created the earth and Adam and Eve and the flood and all these things. Perhaps Israel's already talking about these in an oral form. Perhaps these things were already written down before Moses, and so when he writes, he knows of these accounts. Of course, if there were any discrepancies in those, as he met with God in the tabernacle, I'm sure God told him, well, this is how it was. So he is taking either stories that they knew about, or he's teaching them and codifying them for Israel and for us how things actually took place. And so God is revealing this to him. He's writing these things down. And so Genesis is about how we all got here and what God is doing in creating the created order, all of creation, and creating mankind. And so Genesis is the beginning of that, of how we're learning these things. Authorship, Moses again is the author. This was again undisputed until the higher critical scholars started to make their headway. Moses is acknowledged as author explicitly or implicitly in Exodus 17, Exodus 34, Deuteronomy 31, in Acts 7, Luke 16, John 1, John 5, John 7, Romans 10. So Moses is accepted as author of Exodus 7:14. Then the Lord said to Moses, write this in a book. So he says, write this down. And then in Exodus 34, the Lord said, write down these words. So he's dictating at times, as we talked about. The occasion for the writing of the book, this is the occasion of the Exodus when Israel has left Egypt, and God has, by delivering them, he's already chosen them as the children of Abraham as part of his covenant promise, but then his deliverance from them from Egypt, he's basically purchasing them from slavery. So the political occasion of this is that he has set them toward the land of Israel, toward the promised land, to take it for themselves, because God had given it previously to Abraham, and now it was time for them to go and claim their ownership of it. The spiritual occasion is, again, this deliverance. They are leaving behind idolatry and the idol gods of Egypt. And while they knew Yahweh and worshipped him, they had been involved in this idolatry that was going on in Egypt and the other lands. The geographical occasion then here in Genesis is looking back from Exodus, looking back to the patriarchal period, and looking back to Mesopotamia. Of course, we don't know where pre-flood, where these things took place, though the Tigris and Euphrates rivers and these are named post-flood, but are these this exact same Tigris and Euphrates location of rivers that are listed and talked about in Genesis 1 and Genesis 2? We're not certain because the geology of the world changed through the flood. The date we've talked about, same date of the Pentateuch, the Exodus around 1446, all of this being written by 1406. So Genesis probably early in that, maybe 1443, first 3 years or so after they're leaving Egypt. I've already talked about the development of the Pentateuch, but the purpose of the law, is to instruct us about origins, about God, about how to live. And the first 11 books of Genesis establish the framework for understanding redemption. Who needs to be redeemed? Well, mankind, because we've fallen. And who's doing the redeeming? And how is God doing the redeeming? There are all sorts of questions around that, about the fall of man, about the corruption, about the flood, about judgment, and then redemption through the flood, and the calling of Abraham, and all of these things are going on. But in the first part, 1 through 11, it's about that redemption. And then in the second part, it's how we get the land, how Abraham gets the promise of the land, and then how through the generations in the latter part of the book, it might be 12 through 25 to be how they get physical title of the land, about Abraham, and then 26 through 50 would be the following generations, and how they gain their inheritance to the land, and they get established as a people, and the different tribes, and Jacob blessing them, and that sort of thing. So the purpose of Genesis is both historical and theological. It tells us the history of Israel, and it tells us the theological underpinnings of how God developed them as a nation, how he chose them. God is, of course, sovereign God. He's creator. He creates in time and space all that there is. And so because he creates it, he owns it. And because he creates it and owns it, he has dominion over it. And we see in Genesis 1 that man is the pinnacle of his creation order, and he gives in Genesis 2 man dominion over all of his creation. So God shares and gives that dominion underneath his own rule. He gives that dominion to mankind, and it doesn't take long for man to lose that dominion by falling in the garden, and then for that to devolve into sin and corruption and violence, and then all the world to be wiped out in the flood, and then for God to start over, recreating, in a sense, not from nothing, but reestablishing creation that's been wiped out by the flood. And then it's about who is God going to choose to take the dominion back. And God selects, of course, Noah out of the only righteous man and his family out of all of mankind to deliver through the flood. And then out of Noah, God chooses Shem as the line through whom he will work. And through the line of Shem, he chooses Abraham as the patriarch, the father of the Jews. And then out of Abraham, he chooses, of course, Isaac, not Ishmael. He chooses Jacob, not Edom. And through Jacob, he chooses, while we have this great son of Jacob, Joseph, who God uses to deliver Israel, God does not choose Joseph. He chooses Judah to lead the tribes. God, in Genesis 49, Jacob says of Judah, the scepter shall not depart from between the feet of Judah until Shiloh comes. And if you take that term Shiloh, as I do, Shiloah, which to whom it comes, which to whom it belongs comes. So the scepter will not depart from Judah. Rulership belongs to Judah, rulership of the tribes, until the one to whom it belongs comes. And we know that it was not Saul, when we get down into the books of Samuel. It's not Saul that God has chosen. It's David God has chosen. Saul is a Benjamite. David is from the line of Judah, and it's David that gets then the Davidic covenant. And so it's a Judahite who will rule. But then David's son, the one that God adopts, Solomon, falls flat on his face, gets into idolatry, pursuing horses, pursuing foreign wives, and falling into idolatry. And through that, basically condemns Israel to be kicked out of the land over time, because the rest of the people follow in those footsteps, and the other kings follow into that idolatry as well. So eventually Israel's kicked out. And how do they get back to that Davidic king? Well, and how do they get back to, again, how do we get back to dominion? Man having dominion over creation. Well, it's been proven by history, by the Davidic line, that man can't do it. And so it will require a God-man to come, and that's Jesus from the line of David, to come and reestablish his rule and ownership of the land. And he will be, as it says in the Revelation, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. He will be declared. He is that, but he will come as king and rule. So you see the broad expanse there of the theology of what God is doing. Dominion and dynasty is a great theme, I think, that fits most everything under it. And I get that from Stephen Dempster's book, Dominion and Dynasty. I really appreciate that. I was thinking along those lines before I read his book, and it helped me solidify some things. And so that's what's the beginnings of what's happening in Genesis. We have that dominion given. It's with the fall, and in the first part of the book, again up through chapter 11, we're getting man's fall and the selection of Noah and redemption there. And then we also get the Tower of Babel in chapter 11. So I will be talking about 20 through 25 later, but I'm going to give you a few background issues, and then we'll talk about 1 through 11. Key verses. Well, in the beginning, of course, Genesis 1:1. 3:15, there's the first gospel, the proto-evangelion. So you can read that. It's the first promise of a deliverer to come. Genesis 12:3, the seed of Abraham is promised, and Paul talks about that, and I'll talk about that in some more detail later. Genesis 22, when God provides the ram in place of Isaac, God will provide on the mountain the sacrifice. And in Genesis 49, again, that passage, 49, 9 and 10, the lion of Judah, the scepter, and the ruler's staff, which I've just discussed. Key chapters then, really these same verses, key chapters, creation 1 through 3, fall of man in 3, or 1 and 2 for creation, fall of man in 3, the flood 6 through 9, Tower of Babel 11, Abraham 12 through 25, his call, the covenant, his faith in Genesis 15, sacrifice of Isaac, Genesis 22, Jacob at Penuel, wrestling with God, meeting him face to face, chapter 32. So great chapters, great content here. All sorts of theology throughout the book of Genesis. Christology, when you look at Adam as a type for Christ, which is talked about later. Abel as a type. The Ark of Noah. Melchizedek, the king of Salem, as a type for Christ. Isaac. Some want to look at Joseph as a type for Christ, though it's not so explicitly stated as such. But he could make a good one, but he's just never mentioned in the New Testament. So I'm careful with types, and I wouldn't select him as one. I'm looking at, as far as types, looking at something later, text later, talking about that person or that issue as a type. Theology, the doctrine of God, especially as creator, sovereign, over the origins of man, his providential control and guidance of history and things like that. Pneumatology, the doctrine of the Holy Spirit. The Spirit is there in verse 2 of Genesis 1. He's hovering over the waters and elsewhere. Hamartiology, the doctrine of sin and the fall of man, which helps us understand our need for salvation, our need for redemption, and it's found then in other places. Soteriology, the doctrine of salvation, and God's atoning, starting with the skins, the death of animals, and the skins that he brings to Adam and Eve to clothe them, and so often throughout where God redeems. Angelology, the doctrine of the elect, of evil, of angels, Satan, the enemy. We get into this as well. Inspiration, the doctrine of revelation, retribution, the doctrine of eternal punishment, eschatology, doctrine of future hope. He starts there in Genesis 3 with that first statement of the gospel, the seed of the woman. So that proto-evangelion, that first gospel there, is looking to the future. So all sorts of theology going on, and it's very helpful. All sorts of key peoples: Adam and Eve, God, of course. The serpent is there in the garden. Cain and Abel, Noah, Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Jacob, Rebekah, Rachel, Leah, Joseph, and his 11 brothers are the key players. Mostly we're looking at prose narrative in Genesis. There is some poetry, Jacob's blessings in 49, and a few other minor areas, but it's basically dramatic narrative. There are sections throughout, divisions throughout the book of Genesis that are called Toledotes, which are generations, and these are the generations of Adam, these are the generations of Noah, these are the generations of, and so we get the book divided into sections, which is a literary device that helps the reader know that we're moving on to another section. There are other literary devices used. There's some puns in there, and Pharaoh in Genesis 40, his name literally means great house, and in 40:14 he says, only keep me in mind when it goes well with you and get me out of, when Joseph says, get me out of this house, when you become before Pharaoh, the great house. So there's some plays on words at times. Sarah laughs, then names her son Isaac, which means laughter. There are some things like that going on. Content analysis, again, we've really covered into the sections, but 1 through 3 is the divine cosmology, perhaps, creation and fall, God's created the world. 4 through 9 is Adam's genealogy. 10 through 11, Noah's genealogy. 12 through 25, Abraham and Isaac, the patriarchal history, the gaining of the land. 25 through 50, the father-son cycle of Jacob and Joseph and his sons. A few special topics that we might want to cover. Again, Genesis 1 is about God did it. He created it. He owns it. It belongs to him. And it's all his. We come from nothing. He speaks everything into existence. And it's not only telling the Israelites who did it and who owns it, but it's also somewhat of a polemic against other creation stories that are prevalent in the ancient Near East at the time that say it happened other ways. And God's telling them this is the right way, and there's really a difference, different focus, different scope involved with when you compare the ancient Near Eastern creation stories versus the biblical creation story, the ancient Near Eastern flood stories versus the biblical flood story. Even though at times they are very similar to the creation or the flood stories, of course, the biblical account, in my opinion, is remembering, or of course it's inspired, it is reflecting the accurate account. The others are perhaps oral traditions that come down and they change and they add and they do different things differently. But there are special issues involved in creation and in these comparative studies. The creation story itself or creation account itself in Genesis 1 is much debated as far as how it correlates with science and history. And I'm going to post another lecture with a PowerPoint. I'm going to be posting that, and it will go through Genesis 1 and 2 and explain things visually and explain my view of creation. There are several different views, and there's the gap theory, the day-age theory, evolution, theological evolution type theory. There's the old earth theory, historic creationism, and on. So there's a lot of modern theories by Christians and non-Christians alike. Of course, non-Christians are going with just evolutionary theory, but Christians have a set of things, a couple of which I think are orthodox, and several I think that aren't. But we'll talk through those on that video to come. As far as the ancient Near Eastern texts, you can look at the Enuma Elish story. It's an Akkadian story describing the birth of the gods out of a watery chaos. And when you look at these stories, usually the gods are acting like mankind. They're capricious, they are evil, they are arbitrary, they have to create out of something that's already there. They don't create out of nothing. So they kill each other, and they kill a dragon and then use that dragon sea monster to create the world from all of that. They just have different attitudes, more human attitudes. They are not all powerful. They're not all knowing. They don't have the attributes of God the Father as we know him, and as presented in the text. These have a different feel and different content as you read them. So you can see that they're just a lesser texts, and what they are is people trying to explain their origins or explain their world by their own human sinful natures, and including that. So we want to watch out for those. The creation theories, again, I'm going to cover, and I will be covering the text of Genesis 1 in that other video. So I'm going to just end this video here, and we'll continue with that other one, and continue through Genesis from there.